everyone. My name's Nicolette.
And I'm Haley.
And this is our student Armand. And today we'll be teaching about energy flow through the ecosystems. So let's get started. So first we have to start with what is energy flow in ecosystems. So energy flows through ecosystems in only one direction. And energy is passed from one organism to the next through trophic levels, which we'll explain later on in the presentation. And life is powered by energy. So the energy cycle is vital to our survival and Earth's survival. So everyone gets their nutrients, and every organism gets its nutrients and energy from the energy cycle, so it keeps the environment alive.
So how is energy acquired in the food webs? So there's two types of so there's the food chain and there's the food web. So food chain is a single pathway. It's a diagram that's a single pathway through energy matter flow through an ecosystem. And a food web is a diagram that represents multiple intersecting food chains through which energy matter flow through an ecosystem. So food chains are what make up a food web, so it's just basically a bunch of food chains in the food webs. And energy is acquired by living things in three ways. So there's photosynthesis, chemosynthesis, and the consumption of digestion of other previously living organisms, or heterotrophs, which are just other animal and plant eating organisms.
And so here's an example. This is a diagram of a food chain versus a food web. So a food chain, as you can see, is one singular line of organisms, while a food web is a more complex version that's made up of a bunch of food chains. And so now we need to talk about what the trophic levels are. So trophic levels are levels of organisms that are similar. So organisms that are similar in what they eat or what they do in the environment are put together into one trophic level. And there are 4 different types of trophic levels, starting with the most weak or vulnerable level, which would be primary producers, and then ending with the apex predators, which are tertiary consumers. And in the middle we have primary consumers and secondary consumers.
So these are the trophic levels. So there's primary producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers.
And also, as you can see, the primary producers are the largest trophic level because there's the most of them, and then tertiary consumers is the smallest because there's the least of them.
So what are primary producers? This is our lowest trophic level, and this is what's on the bottom of the chain. So it's the first trophic level, and primary producers utilize solar energy to produce organic material through photosynthesis at the first trophic level. So primary producers, they're also called just producers, are autotrophs capable of producing organic compounds from light energy or chemical energy. So from the sun, they create energy to produce food. So
they are the most important.
Yeah, they are the most important of the 4. And primary producers are capable of manufacturing their own food from the sunlight.
And then next we have the primary consumers, which by the name you might be able to tell, this is what they eat the primary producers. So these are animals that eat the primary consumers, and they're mostly herbivores because primary producers are mostly plants, so they're herbivores. And they get all their energy to do breathing, digesting food, everything from the primary producers.
Next are secondary consumers. So this is the 3rd trophic level, and they are carnivores. And they feed on herbivores and derive energy of their sustenance and growth. So secondary consumers are largely, it's basically carnivores that feed on carnivores and herbivores. So they feed on both. So there's other members of this group, which are omnivores, that not only feed on primary consumers, but they also feed on producers and autotrophs. An example is like a fox eating a rabbit. And different plants and animals species are linked to one another through the food chains. So that's how they're connected through the food chains.
And then on the top of our trophic levels, we have the tertiary consumers, which is our 4th trophic level. And tertiary consumers is an animal that obtains its nutrients by eating primary consumers and secondary consumers. So tertiary consumers are carnivore predators, although there can be omnivores, it just depends. But they're basically mostly your apex predators and are on the top of the food chain. And here's another diagram of our trophic levels. So as you can see, plants on the bottom, smaller animals, bigger animals, and then our biggest animals.
So these are examples of each levels. So the primary producers are like green plants, algae, small shrubs, fruit, phytoplankton, etc. So it's basically plants and just what primary consumers are going to eat and are able to eat. Oh, and primary consumers are like caterpillars, grasshoppers, like small insects, or like animals that can only eat the primary producers, like plants.
And then we have secondary consumers, which are getting into our bigger animals, so like spiders and snakes and seals. So these are animals that actually hunt for their food, they don't just eat plants. And then we have our tertiary consumers, which are like sharks, tuna, lions. They are on the top of the food chain.
They're the top dogs.
So, why is each level of the food chain important? So basically, each organism in a food chain represents one trophic level, and it is important to note that 90% of the energy is lost between trophic levels. So only about 10% of the energy goes from one level to the other level. And so that 10% states that each trophic level can only give 10% of its energies to the next level. So the other 90% is used to live, grow, reproduce, and is lost into the environment as heat. And so all energy periods start with energy from the sun, which is transferred to the first trophic level of producers. Now it is time for your test.
Yeah.
It's time to see how much you know about trophic
How much
levels
you're paying
and
attention.
energy flow. So question number 1. What is an example of a primary consumer? A tuna, B, a lion, C, a grasshopper, or D, none of the above?
C, a grasshopper.
You are correct. Our primary consumers are the ones that are eating our primary producers, so like insects, which would include grasshoppers.
Second assessment question. So how many trophic levels are there? 6, 2, 3, or 4?
D, 4.
You are correct.
There are 4 trophic levels.
Now we have assessment question number 3. What is the difference between food chains and food webs? A, food chains are made of food webs. B, food webs are made of food chains. Or C, there is no difference.
B.
Correct. Food webs are made of food chains, not the other way around.
So assessment question number 4. Which trophic level is the highest? Primary consumers, primary producers, secondary consumers, or tertiary consumers?
Tertiary consumers.
Correct. That is the top dog. That is nothing can eat that.
And then our last question for you is, which is the most important trophic level? A, primary producers. B, tertiary consumers. C, secondary consumers.
Primary producers. A.
You are correct. They are the ones that take the sunlight, so they make the energy, and without them, we wouldn't have the energy.
And nothing else would be able to live without them.
We need them. And
Thank
that's our
you.
presentation. Here's some memes about energy flow through the ecosystems. So hopefully you learned something new today.
Yeah. Thank you.
I did. Thank you.
Goodbye.